Hi everyone, welcome to episode 6 of Planet Studio tutorial. There's quite a lot to cover in this episode, so let's dive right in. To recap, in the first 4 episodes we covered the Studio user interface, how to use and modify templates, edit parameters, construct systems, and manipulate structures. We then built on this knowledge in episode 5 by looking at noise in more detail, gaining an understanding of noise frequency, gain, lacunarity, and domain warping. Finally, we turned to masking and remapping, comparing the linear and curve remap modifiers and discussing their use. This episode will draw a lot on tutorials 2 and 5, though I will do my best to quickly recap key points as we go along. In this 6th tutorial, we will look at biomes. What are they, why do we need them, and how are they generated? So firstly, what are biomes? Essentially, they're masked regions of the planet where a specific set of modifiers are active. For example, on the ESS moon Phoebe, seen here, the modifiers producing the cracked crater fields terrain are in one biome, and the modifiers producing the smooth red regions are in another biome. We do not want the cracks and craters to appear in the red highland regions, and equally we do not want the red coloration to appear in the valley regions. So now for our second question, why do we need biomes? At first thought it might seem better to just use noise masking like we saw in the last episode, and indeed it is possible to make a celestial body with only one biome. Some bodies have the same terrain type covering their entire surface. However, in cases like this moon, we can clearly see there's a big difference both in terrain type and colour palette in these two areas. Trying to create Phoebe using only one biome would become very painful and the code would be difficult to read. If we wanted to have altitude-based subbiomes, for example, these issues would then just get worse. So overall, I'd recommend using multiple biomes when there's a significant difference in terrain type or colours in different regions of your design. And as an aside, that does raise an important point. Once you venture past template randomization or basic noise tweaking, it's critical to have a good idea of what you want your creation to look like. Without a solid design, it's easy to get off track. Now that we know what biomes are and why they're used, let's tackle the question of how they're made. Taking a closer look at this planet's code, we can see that there are several predefined folders called passes. When the game is building the planet, it runs through these passes from top to bottom, using each one to define the final result. At the top of the code is the biomes pass itself. Modifiers within this pass will control where the biomes are distributed. Beneath is the height pass, containing modifiers that act on the entire planet, regardless of biome. Next is the height biomes pass, which contains a subfolder for each biome. The code for generating terrain unique to each biome goes in these folders. This is good for efficiency, as these terrain modifiers will only run within that biome, and that's yet another reason to use a proper biome distribution. The key take-home point about these passes is that the biome distribution occurs first. Only then can terrain that's specific to these biomes be generated. We couldn't define the biomes in the height biomes pass, nor could we place terrain within our chosen biomes in the biome pass. This structure is fundamental to how the game generates celestial bodies, so we must be really careful to follow it. For the rest of the tutorial, we'll be using the blank template. Planet Studio gives us several options for mapping a biome distribution. The 3 which we'll look at in detail in this episode are the modifiers value-based and add biome and the paintbrush tool. These are the 3 which I use the most, and they are in my opinion the easiest to grasp, but I'd encourage you as always to investigate the other biome modifiers too and decide what works best for you. Value-based biomes takes a noise input and maps biomes to specified sections of that noise. The section or range of noise which each biome is mapped to can be defined by the user. I'm sure you're all familiar with looking at the value distributions in noise using colours in the Data Visualize modifier by now, so it should be quite easy to imagine how biomes could be mapped onto the sections of a noise, or with the modifier the colours of the noise that fall within certain ranges. It's also possible to blend biomes together by specifying ranges that overlap, but we do need to be careful with this, as the game runs the code for both biomes in areas where they overlap. Logically then, if this is used excessively, that can result in poor performance. However, the Add Biome modifier combines this concept with value-based biomes by taking a noise and painting that single biome over the top of the others based off this input noise. This modifier works especially well with either Remap noise or the planet brush, and it doesn't cause big problems with lag. So we'll construct an example planet where we use both. Let's start with the blank template and build up a biome distribution step by step. Let's say we want a planet with a few large bodies of water, then mountains and grassy plains with roughly equal distribution. From this information, we can already tell that we need more than one biome. The lakes will clearly want to have well-defined edges, but the mountains and grasslands can have smooth boundaries that flow into each other a bit. For this distribution, I'm going to use the value-based modifier to map the mountains and plains, then the Add Biome modifier to define regions for the lowered shapes that the water will fill to make lakes. Before we actually start adding those modifiers though, let's prepare the biome list by clicking on the Biome tab. By default, one biome is already loaded in. Let's rename that existing one Plains. And then we'll add two more biomes. First one will be called Mountains, and the next one will be called Lakes. Now going back to the Terrain Generation tab, we can see the subfolders within the height biome pass have been generated. Here we have Plains, Mountains, and Lakes. Let's ignore the contents of the biome subfolders and concentrate on getting the distribution working. That will all be taking place within the biome pass. To help us with this, we're going to use a Biomes Debug Visualizer. Here we can see the Debug Visualizer Biome Modifier, which is one we'll be using here. This modifier is quite different to the standard Debug Visualizer, which you're probably more familiar with. This one replaces each biome with a colour that's then painted onto the planet, so we can use it to see where the biomes are mapped to. When we refresh the planet, we can see that by default the first biome, in this case Plains, covers the entire surface. This is because we haven't yet referenced any other biomes. Before we do that though, let's change the colours to be more sensible. So let's go with green for Plains, and how about grey for Mountains, and then let's go with blue for the lakes. As a quick side note, you may find it helpful to use the equirectangular map for building biome distributions. Just bear in mind that it does cause distortions towards the poles. Now clicking onto our biome modifier, let's get the mountains biome appearing using the value-based biomes modifier. We need to add another reference to a biome in this biomes list so that this modifier maps both plains and mountains. So let's click Add. You can see we now have these two references. We need to remember to set the slider for each item in the list, otherwise the modifier will continue to map only the default biome onto the planet. So by sliding across this slider, we can set one to be referencing plains, the next one to be referencing mountains. We'll set the plains biome to appear on regions where the noise equals -1 to 0, and the mountains biome for 0 to +1. Now that we've got both biomes connected to this modifier, we need to prepare a suitable noise input to control that distribution. To help us with this, let's disable the Biomes Visualizer and then get a standard Debug Data Visualizer. Rebuilding the planet shows that it's currently covered in a constant value of 0. That's represented as black here. Looking at the data flow, enabled with the button here, confirms that. This modifier getConstant, which connects into the Biome Modifier, is plugged into our visualizer and has a value of 0. So let's delete that constant and replace it with a noise modifier. We'll drag the noise up to the correct position. We now have noise here. From now on, we'll just use this Equimap to help with our distribution. Note that I'm setting brightness to 0 for visualizer accuracy, and I can press the refresh button in the right-hand panel to update it after each change. I'm going to edit the settings in the noise just a little to produce a roughly equal amount of both biomes, which in terms of our noise visualizer here will be an equal distribution of positive and negative values. Just remembering here the positive values are shown by yellow towards red, 0 by black, and negative to this sort of cyan colour towards purple. I'm going to edit these parameters a little. We're going to go with Perlin fractal, going to change the seed to 2. These values are ones which I found before making the tutorial that worked well. Frequency to 0.5, and then we're going to set 4 octaves. Now when we refresh, see we've got a really nice equal distribution of our blue colours negative and our yellow colours positive. I'm very happy with this distribution, so let's disable the data visualizer now and re-enable the biome one. Then refreshing here, we can see that the plains and mountains biomes are now mapped using the noise that we just created. However, they currently show very sharp edges, which aren't really in line with the look that we chose in our original design. We want to have smooth transitions between the two biomes. Luckily, that's easily achieved with some edits to the range values in the Biome Modifier. If the values are set to overlap slightly, both biomes will be mapped to some regions, resulting in a smoothing effect. So let's do that by setting the upper bound of the plains biome to be 0.2 and the lower bound of the mountains biome to be minus 0.2. This produces an overlap of 0.4, which should be perfect. This change is obviously a step in the right direction, but there's now a little too much of the mountains biome for my taste. Let's correct that by changing the ranges a little. We still want to keep the same amount of overlap, so let's increase the upper range for plains and increase the lower range for mountains by an equal amount. We'll set plains to be from -1 to positive 0.3 and mountains to be from negative 0.1 to 1. The result now looks just like what we're wanting. We now have the two biomes mapped, but what about the lakes? The Add Biome modifier is our best friend here, so let's get one. We'll also be needing another noise modifier. Here we have our Add Biome, and then we'll have our noise modifier, like so. Now, the new noise needs to be connected to the Add Biome modifier, and this needs to be placed after the original Biomes modifier, but before our Debug Visualizer. And our very key step here is to set the Biome Index of this not plains nor mountains, but to lakes. I cut it out of the final video, but the last 10 minutes was spent by me raging at my computer because I had forgotten to do that and didn't realise I'd made that mistake. So don't be dumb like me. Don't do that. Now I'm just going to change this noise parameter here, the frequency to 1.5, once again a value which I'd pre-decided before the tutorial. Now let's update and see what the result looks like. And there we go, all three biomes are now visible to some extent. However, this isn't exactly what we're looking for. The lakes aren't meant to be diffuse, and they don't really reach full strength in enough areas. Now, you may recognise this problem from a previous episode, and using the methods that we covered there, let's remap this noise to have smaller, stronger areas. We'll use a linear remap for this purpose, and take a narrow input portion of the noise and map it to the full range. Let's add in our linear remap. We're going to take the range 0.3 as our from minimum, 0.4 from maximum, but we're going to keep it to be outputted at the full range. Now refreshing, we can see that looks very good. We could continue to tweak these numbers or even go back and edit the noise parameters here, but I'm happy with this result for now. Chances are that for most planets this sort of simple procedurally generated distribution with some edits to the noise and remaps will just be perfect. But what if we wanted the lakes to occur in specific places, or to have an exact shape? That's where the planet brush comes in. We can use it to produce a hand-painted noise map for input into the Add Biome modifier instead of this randomly generated noise. The game uses noise modifiers to call painted maps, so first we must give the noise modifier a map name to use. Let's go with Lakes Map. Once the name is entered, we get some additional options. We'll just leave them as default for now. Pedro was keen for me to go into more details about octave skipping to blend the edges of brush strokes, etc., but for now I'm going to be rude and ignore him. I want to return to this topic in a later video to give it the attention it really deserves. But for now, just realise that there are many useful features I'm not covering here. They're accessed in both the painting UI we'll see in a minute and within the noise modifier here that the map is referenced in. They provide better ways to combine randomization with your painting. And as with everything I'm covering in these tutorials, this is definitely worth exploring further. Now let's move across to the Planet Brush map. Clicking on the tab, we'll create a new map. The game will ask us whether we want to keep the current procedurally generated contents that the noise modifier outputted before. For this case, we want an empty map. The game will then prompt us for a file name. I believe it's best practice to use the map name as the file name. Now we've created, overwritten, because there was a previous one there, and we can now click the Edit Map. This allows us to enter the painting user interface. Most of the options here are really self-explanatory and have good tooltips, so it's definitely worth exploring further on your own. But the main things to know are brush radius, hardness and value are all set with the sliders, and the camera moves with the keyboard the same as the standard planet editing view, but obviously double click and mouse panning are disabled, as clicking around will paint with the brush. It's good to reset the camera regularly so you don't get lost while painting. The tricky perspective can make it really hard to get relative scales correct. Let's go ahead and paint on some lakes. I don't really want to get caught up on the details of doing this, so we'll just do some strange shapes which wouldn't normally be possible with procedural noise. So we'll have a triangular shaped lake here, and then give it a little bit of an outlet here, and then we'll have our final lake round here which will make a sort of comma shape. When the map's completed, we can hit Save Changes. We can now go back and connect the map to the biome distribution. Going back to the Terrain tab here. Let's check out what we created with a data visualizer. We must be careful though to disable the Biome Visualizer while we're doing this. Refreshing it, we can see the funky lake shapes which we painted in. Now the noise map that we just produced no longer needs remapping, as it has the full strength in the exact regions we painted it onto. We can see that confirmed here. We've got -1 in the other areas, and then we've got +1 in the lake areas. So we can disable this remap, like so, and just run the output straight into the Add Biome modifier. Let's get the Biome Visualizer back up and running and take a look at our new biome distribution. And there we have the alternative distribution with hand-painted lakes. From this point, the next steps would be to generate terrain in each biome, placing the modifiers for each within the subfolder in the Height Biomes pass. Subbiomes for each of the biomes will work in the same way as the biomes themselves, with each subbiome assigned to a range of an input noise within the height biome pass. Subbiomes can then be used to control the colours and textures applied to the terrain in each biome. Now, as always, I'm only scratching the surface of what Planet Studio is capable of doing here. I'm sure you can imagine the benefits of combining some of the methods we've looked at to make more complex and detailed biome distributions, then combining them with carefully crafted subbiomes. With this detail will come complexity, but keep calm, name your modifiers as soon as you add them, save regularly, and read the data flow. Before long, impressive planets will be filling your game's user files. Now, once again, this has been a bit of a technical episode, but I really hope it's been useful. If you do have any questions, please put them in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. But before I wrap up episode 6, there is a bit of news I wanted to share. The next episode is likely to be the final full-length installation of the tutorial, most likely a more informal live commentary video showing a case study planet. I'll try to cover some topics which haven't fitted easily into the last 6 episodes, like expressions, producing ring textures, and crater generation. Then after episode 7, I'll be switching to shorter how-to videos, which focus on individual techniques and tasks. Longer term, I'm also planning to begin work on a written manual for Planet Studio based around this series, hopefully with even more up-to-date information on the latest techniques. If there's anything specific you'd like to see in future, please let me know, and I'll see you all next time.